The moment Sarah reached for the diamond earrings, 3 security guards rushed over and physically blocked her path. "Step away from the counter," one barked. "Now!" Sarah Mitchell, 28, and David Coleman, 35, had just walked hand in hand into Westfield Premium Outlets for a peaceful shopping trip. Sarah spotted beautiful earrings and pointed them out to David with a smile. But when she pulled out her wallet, everything changed. Security surrounded them instantly. One guard grabbed her wrist as she reached for the jewelry case. Another positioned himself behind David. A third started radioing for backup. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the lead guard demanded, his hand moving toward his radio. Customers stopped and stared as the couple was cornered like criminals. That's when Sarah and David exchanged a look that said everything. These guards had no idea they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. What happened next would change everything. It was supposed to be their first real day off in 3 months. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her sunglasses as she stepped out of their silver Honda Accord, breathing in the crisp October air of Northern Virginia. The Westfield Premium Outlet stretched before them like a temple to American consumerism, all gleaming storefronts and pristine walkways. "Remember when we used to window shop here in college?" David Coleman asked, locking the car with a satisfying beep. At 35, he still moved with the careful precision that had gotten him through Secret Service training, but today he wore it loosely, like a comfortable jacket. Sarah laughed, tucking her natural hair behind her ear. Window shopping was all we could afford back then. She squeezed his hand. "Today we can actually buy something." They'd earned this moment. 3 months of working opposite schedules, of passing each other in hallways with nothing more than quick kisses and promises to catch up later. Sarah's work with the ATF had kept her traveling between Richmond and D.C., tracking illegal weapons shipments that seemed to multiply faster than she could document them. David's Secret Service assignments had him pulling double shifts during the political season, protecting officials whose names he couldn't mention even to her. The mall hummed with Saturday afternoon energy. Families pushed strollers between stores. Teenagers clustered around phone screens, and well-dressed couples browsed with the unhurried pace of people who belonged there. Sarah and David fit right in, dressed in dark jeans and comfortable sweaters, looking like any young professional couple enjoying their weekend. "Where to first?" David asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah had been eyeing a particular jewelry store's window display for months during their rushed coffee runs. "Just a quick look," she said, but her smile suggested otherwise. They wandered through the main corridor, past stores selling everything from designer handbags to organic skincare. The afternoon light streamed through skylights, casting everything in the warm glow that made expensive things look even more desirable. Sarah paused at a coffee cart, ordering them both cappuccinos with an extra shot. "You know," David said, watching her count out exact change, "we could just use a card like normal people." "Cash keeps things simple," Sarah replied, a habit from years of tracking financial crimes. "Besides, I like the weight of it. Makes purchases feel more real." They continued walking, sipping their coffee and pointing out ridiculous price tags with the comfortable mockery of people who'd worked for everything they had. The $300 candle, a $150 phone case, a $500 scarf that looked identical to one they'd seen at Target for $20. "This is why I love you," David said as Sarah snorted at a $200 handbag. "You keep me grounded." "Someone has to," she replied, but her attention had already shifted to the jewelry store ahead. "Just 5 minutes?" The store sparkled like a cave of crystals. Even from outside, they could see the careful arrangement of diamonds, gold, and platinum that caught the light and threw it back in 1,000 directions. A few well-dressed customers moved slowly inside, examining pieces with the reverence usually reserved for art museums. 5 minutes, David agreed, though he suspected it would be longer. Sarah pressed her face to the window like a kid outside a candy store. "Look at those earrings," she whispered, pointing to a pair of diamond studs displayed prominently in the center. "They're perfect." David looked closer. The earrings were beautiful, simple enough for everyday wear but elegant enough for special occasions. The kind of jewelry that said success without screaming it, the kind Sarah deserved after all her hard work. "How much?" he asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know. Sarah squinted at the tiny price tag. $800. They stood in silence for a moment, calculating. It was more than they usually spent on non-essentials, but not impossible. Sarah had been promoted 6 months ago, and David's security clearance bump had come with a salary increase. They'd been careful with money, saving for a house down payment and their future. "It's a lot," Sarah said quietly. "It's your birthday next month," David reminded her, "and your sister's wedding is in December. You could wear them for both." Sarah's reflection smiled back at her from the store window. She'd been wearing the same small gold hoops for 3 years, a gift from her mother when she'd graduated from Quantico. Beautiful, but simple. She was ready for something that reflected how far she'd come. 5 minutes turned into a shopping trip? David asked. "Maybe," Sarah said. "If they have them in stock, if they look as good in person, if you stop making excuses and go try them on." Sarah took a deep breath. "Okay, but just to look." They pushed through the glass doors into a world of carefully controlled luxury. Soft music played from hidden speakers. The lighting was warm but bright enough to make every stone sparkle. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and possibility. A young sales associate with perfectly styled blonde hair looked up from arranging a display. Her smile was professional, but genuine. "Good afternoon. Let me know if you need help with anything." "Thank you," Sarah said, already gravitating toward the earring display. "We're just browsing." But even as she said it, she knew she was lying. Those earrings called to her with the promise of celebration, of marking this moment when everything in their lives felt aligned and hopeful. What could go wrong with buying a pair of earrings? What they didn't know was that someone had been watching them from the moment they entered the mall. The first sign something was wrong came from the peripheral vision of trained professionals. Sarah had been examining the diamond studs for 3 minutes when she noticed the shift in atmosphere. Subtle at first, a change in the background murmur of conversations, the way foot traffic seemed to slow near their store. David felt it too, his shoulders tightening almost imperceptibly as his Secret Service instincts kicked in. 2 men in navy blazers had positioned themselves outside the jewelry store. Not security uniforms, but the kind of generic business casual that screamed mall management. They weren't looking directly at Sarah and David, but their attention was unmistakably focused in their direction. "The earrings are beautiful," the sales associate whose name tag read Madison was saying. "They're from our signature collection, very popular for special occasions." Sarah nodded, trying to maintain normal conversation while tracking the movement outside. A third man had joined the first 2. This one was older, with grey hair and the bearing of someone used to giving orders. He spoke briefly to the others, then all 3 spread out in a loose formation around the store's entrance. "Could I see them?" Sarah asked Madison, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "Of course." Madison retrieved a small key from beneath the counter and unlocked the display case. "Are they for a special occasion?" "My birthday next month," Sarah said, accepting the earrings. They were even more beautiful up close, catching the store's lighting and throwing back tiny rainbows. "And my sister's wedding in December." David moved closer, ostensibly to examine the earrings but actually to get a better angle on the men outside. His training had taught him to catalogue details automatically. All 3 appeared to be in their 40s or 50s. 2 wore earpieces, 1 kept checking his phone. More security, but with an intensity that seemed disproportionate for their location. "They suit you perfectly," Madison said as Sarah held the earrings up to her ears. "The cut really complements your face shape." In the mirror, Sarah could see both her reflection and the partial view of the corridor behind them. More people had stopped walking past their store. A woman with a stroller had paused to check her phone. 2 teenagers stood near the coffee cart they'd visited earlier, but their attention wasn't on their drinks. "David," Sarah said quietly, "are you seeing this?" "Yeah," he murmured, pretending to examine a display of men's watches. Professional interest or coincidence? It was their code for asking whether they were witnessing a security situation or paranoid from too many years in federal law enforcement. But the answer was becoming clearer by the moment. The formation outside was too precise, too coordinated to be random. Madison either didn't notice the tension or was trained to ignore it. "Would you like to try them on properly? I can hold your current earrings." Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her to pay quickly and leave, but that would mean letting fear dictate her choices. She'd bought jewelry before. She belonged in this store as much as anyone else. More importantly, running would confirm whatever suspicion had drawn this attention in the first place. "Yes, please," she said, removing her gold hoops. The diamond studs transformed her reflection. They caught the light with every small movement, adding a sparkle that made her feel both elegant and powerful. For a moment she forgot about the men outside, and simply enjoyed the image of herself wearing something beautiful and expensive. "They're perfect," David said, and his smile was genuine despite the circumstances. "You look amazing." "The diamonds are excellent quality," Madison added. "Conflict-free, of course, and they come with our lifetime warranty." Sarah turned her head to see how the light played off the stones. In the mirror, she caught sight of another man entering the store. This one was younger, broad-shouldered, with the kind of buzz cut that suggested military or security background. He moved to a display near the entrance and began examining men's rings with obvious disinterest. "How much again?" Sarah asked, though she remembered perfectly. "800, Madison said. "But we're running a promotion this weekend. 10% off any purchase over $750. $720, still expensive, but within their range." And the earrings were exactly what she'd imagined for her sister's wedding. The kind of jewelry that would photograph beautifully and make her feel confident during such an important family moment. But the feeling of being watched was intensifying. The man examining rings had moved closer. Outside, one of the original men was speaking into his radio. More people had found reasons to linger in the corridor near their store. "Sarah," David said softly, "your call, but we should decide quickly." She looked at her reflection one more time. The earrings were beautiful. The store was legitimate. She had every right to be there to make this purchase, to celebrate her success and upcoming family milestones. Leaving now would feel like surrender. "I'll take them," she said to Madison. "Wonderful. How would you like to pay?" Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She'd stopped at the bank that morning, withdrawing $800 for their shopping trip. The bills were crisp and new, still held together with the bank's paper band. The moment she placed the cash on the counter, everything changed. The instant Madison saw the cash, her expression shifted from friendly to uncertain. And that's when the first security guard walked through the door. "Excuse me." The voice came from directly behind them, calm but carrying the weight of authority that made both Sarah and David freeze. They turned to see a man in his mid-40s wearing a navy blazer with a discreet security badge. His name tag read T. Morrison, and his eyes were fixed on the stack of cash Sarah had placed on the counter. "Is there a problem?" David asked, his voice level, but his body already shifting into a defensive posture. "Just routine," Morrison said, but his attention remained on the money. "We've had some issues with counterfeit bills lately. Mind if I take a look?" Madison, the sales associate, had gone very still. Her friendly demeanor had evaporated, replaced by the nervous energy of someone caught in the middle of a situation she didn't understand. "The bills are real," Sarah said, making no move to hand them over. "They came directly from First National this morning." "I'm sure they are," Morrison replied, but he moved closer to the counter. "Standard procedure, though. We have to check any large cash transactions." The lie was obvious to anyone with law enforcement training. Department stores didn't authenticate currency. That was the responsibility of individual retailers, and even then, only for bills over a certain denomination. Morrison was fishing, creating a pretext for an interaction that had no legal basis. "What's the store's policy?" David asked Madison, putting her in the uncomfortable position of having to choose sides. We don't usually..." Madison looked helplessly between them and Morrison. "I mean, cash is cash, right?" "Not always," Morrison said. And now there were 2 more security guards entering the store. "We've had sophisticated counterfeiting operations targeting high-end retailers. Young couples, nice clothes, expensive items. The bills look perfect until you know what to look for." The racial implications hung in the air like smoke. Young black couple, expensive items, sophisticated operation. The subtext was clear to everyone in the store. Sarah felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd faced this before. The assumption that her presence in certain spaces required explanation, that her money was somehow suspect, that her success must be illegitimate. But knowledge didn't make it hurt less. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked. "Nothing," Morrison said quickly. "Like I said, routine check, you understand." But Sarah didn't understand, and she wasn't going to pretend she did. "I understand that you've singled out the only black customers in this store for additional scrutiny, based on no evidence of wrongdoing." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison's face tightened, and the two guards behind him shifted uncomfortably. Madison looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Ma'am, there's no need to make this about race," Morrison said. But his tone had changed from professional to defensive. "We're just doing our job." "And what job is that exactly?" David asked. "Because authenticating currency isn't typically a mall security function." Morrison's jaw clenched. He was clearly used to compliance, not questioning. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you both to step outside the store while we sort this out." "Sort what out?" Sarah asked. "We haven't done anything wrong. We haven't even completed a transaction." "The cash needs to be verified," Morrison said, and now his hand was resting on his radio. "And I need to see some identification." There it was, the real purpose of this interaction. They wanted to know who Sarah and David were, to run their names through whatever system Morrison had access to. The counterfeit currency story was just a pretext. Sarah looked at David, and in that glance they had an entire conversation. They could comply, produce their IDs, and likely end this harassment quickly. Their federal credentials would shut down Morrison's fishing expedition immediately, but compliance would also validate the stop, suggesting that security had legitimate grounds for their suspicion. Or they could refuse, stand on their rights as customers who had committed no crime, and force Morrison to either escalate or back down. It was a risk, but it was also a matter of principle. "Are we being detained?" David asked, using the precise legal language that every cop understood. Morrison hesitated. Detention required reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, and he knew it. Examining jewelry and producing legal currency didn't constitute a crime, no matter what assumptions he'd made about their ability to afford $800 earrings. "So you're being asked to cooperate with a routine security procedure," Morrison said, falling back on bureaucratic language. "That's not an answer," Sarah said. "Either we're free to leave, in which case we'll complete our purchase and go, or you're detaining us, in which case you need articulable grounds for reasonable suspicion." Morrison's face went red. Clearly he hadn't expected to face customers who knew their rights, much less ones who could quote legal standards from memory. The other guards looked uncertain, waiting for direction from their supervisor. "I'm going to need to call my manager," Morrison said finally. "Please do," Sarah replied. "We'll wait right here." As Morrison stepped away to use his radio, Sarah and David exchanged another look. They were past the point of simple harassment now. Whatever happened next would determine whether this was just an ugly incident or something that required official response. Madison, meanwhile, had been watching the entire exchange with growing horror. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to Sarah. "This isn't... We don't usually... It's not your fault," Sarah said gently. "But I'd like those earrings back, please." Madison carefully removed the diamond studs from Sarah's ears and handed them back. The moment felt loaded with significance. The jewelry that had represented celebration and success, now tainted by the assumption that she had no right to own such things. The radio chatter from Morrison's conversation was too quiet to hear clearly, but the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever was happening had moved beyond routine. As Morrison ended his radio call and turned back toward them, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Standing outside the store was a man she recognized from a completely different context, one that had nothing to do with shopping, and everything to do with the federal investigation she'd been working on for 6 months. The man outside the jewelry store wore a charcoal gray suit and had salt and pepper hair styled with the precision of someone who understood the importance of appearance. To anyone else, he looked like a well-dressed businessman taking a Saturday stroll through an upscale mall, but Sarah Mitchell had been studying his photograph for 6 months. Anthony Kellerman, age 54, regional manager for a chain of luxury retail stores, and according to ATF intelligence, a key figure in a sophisticated weapons trafficking network that used high-end shopping centers as distribution points. Sarah's training kicked in like muscle memory. She didn't react visibly, didn't change her expression or posture, but her mind began cataloging details with the precision of someone whose life depended on observation. Kellerman was positioned where he could see directly into the jewelry store. His attention was focused on her and David, not on the merchandise in nearby shop windows. And, most importantly, he was here during what should have been a random shopping trip. "The manager is on his way," Morrison announced, returning from his radio conversation. "Shouldn't be more than a few minutes." David nodded politely, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders increase. His Secret Service training made him hypersensitive to surveillance, and the growing crowd of casual observers outside the store would have triggered every alarm in his professional toolkit. In the meantime, Morrison continued, I'm going to need you both to remain in the store. Are we under arrest? Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. Morrison couldn't arrest them for attempting to buy jewelry with legal currency, no matter what his suspicions. Of course not, Morrison said, but there are procedures to follow. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Kellerman's presence couldn't be coincidental. He was either here for reasons connected to his legitimate business, or he'd somehow identified her as the ATF agent investigating his operation. The latter possibility was deeply troubling, suggesting either a leak in federal intelligence or surveillance capabilities she hadn't anticipated. A fourth security guard had joined the group outside the store. This one was younger, possibly early 30s, with the kind of hyper-alert posture that suggested military background. He was positioned near the mall's main corridor, where he could monitor foot traffic in multiple directions. Sarah, David said quietly, this is feeling orchestrated. She knew what he meant. Random harassment usually involved one or two guards making assumptions based on prejudice. This felt like a coordinated response to specific intelligence. The question was whether they were being targeted as black shoppers who didn't belong in an expensive store, or as federal agents who'd gotten too close to something sensitive. Madison, the sales associate, was arranging and rearranging the jewelry display with nervous energy. I really think there's been a misunderstanding, she said to Morrison. These customers were perfectly pleasant. They asked good questions about the jewelry. They knew exactly what they wanted. Ma'am, please let us handle this, Morrison replied, but his tone was gentler when addressing the white sales clerk than it had been with Sarah and David. Through the store's window, Sarah watched Kellerman check his phone, then walk casually toward the jewelry store entrance. Her pulse quickened. If he entered the store and recognized her, the situation would become infinitely more complicated. Her cover identity for the ATF investigation would be blown, potentially compromising months of intelligence gathering. But if she revealed her federal credentials now to end this harassment, she might inadvertently alert Kellerman to her true identity. Either way, the shopping trip she'd planned as a simple celebration was rapidly becoming a professional nightmare. David, she said softly, we need to... I know, he interrupted, following her gaze toward Kellerman. Options? They were trapped between competing imperatives. As private citizens, they had every right to complete their purchase and leave. As federal agents, they had responsibilities that complicated simple solutions. And as a black couple in a situation that was clearly escalating beyond normal bounds, they faced risks that their white colleagues never had to consider. Morrison's radio crackled with an incoming message. He listened intently, then responded in a voice too low for them to hear clearly. But his body language shifted from officious to urgent. Change of plans, he announced. I need you both to come with me to the security office. On what grounds? David asked. Suspected fraud, Morrison said, and now his hand was resting openly on his radio. The bills you presented show signs of sophisticated counterfeiting. It was a complete fabrication, but it provided Morrison with the legal pretext he'd been lacking. Suspected fraud was a criminal offense that justified detention pending investigation. Sarah realized with cold clarity that they were being maneuvered into a situation where their options would be even more limited. Outside the store, Kellerman had stopped walking. He was close enough now that Sarah could see his face clearly, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. Recognition. Not the vague sense that he'd seen her somewhere before, but the specific awareness of exactly who she was and what she represented. Anthony Kellerman knew she was ATF, and he was using mall security to neutralize a federal investigation. Actually, Sarah said to Morrison, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, I think it's time we showed you some identification. She reached slowly into her purse, maintaining eye contact with Morrison to ensure he didn't misinterpret her movements as threatening. Her fingers found the leather credential case she'd carried for 6 years, through raids and investigations and congressional briefings. Before you do anything else, she continued, you should know that you're interfering with federal agents in the performance of their duties. Morrison's expression changed from confident to confused to alarmed in the space of 3 seconds. What? Sarah flipped open her credential case. revealing the gold ATF badge and photo identification that had taken her through some of the most dangerous situations of her career. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives. David was already reaching for his own credentials. Agent David Coleman, United States Secret Service. The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear the soft background music playing through the store's speakers. Morrison stared at their badges as if they might disappear if he looked away. Madison's eyes went wide with shock and what might have been embarrassment. And outside the store, Anthony Kellerman turned and walked quickly toward the mall's exit, his casual stroll replaced by the urgent pace of a man who'd just realized he'd made a terrible mistake. But as Sarah and David watched Kellerman disappear into the crowd, Morrison's radio crackled with a new message that made them both freeze. "All units, we have confirmation. These two are wanted for questioning in connection with the theft of federal evidence from the Richmond field office. Detain immediately." The words hit Sarah like ice water. Federal evidence theft, Richmond field office. It was impossible, absurd and terrifyingly specific. Someone with intimate knowledge of federal law enforcement operations was using that knowledge to frame them. "That's a lie," Sarah said firmly, but she could see doubt creeping into Morrison's eyes. A minute ago she'd been a shoplifter. Now she was supposedly a corrupt federal agent. The escalation was too convenient to be anything but orchestrated. Morrison backed away from them, his hand moving to his radio. "Dispatch, this is Morrison. I need immediate backup at the jewelry store. We have two subjects claiming to be federal agents, possibly armed." Claiming. David's voice carried the cold edge that Sarah had heard him use during security briefings. "Would you like to call the ATF field office and verify Agent Mitchell's credentials? Or perhaps the Secret Service duty desk?" But Morrison was no longer listening. The radio message had given him exactly what he needed: grounds to treat them as immediate threats, rather than customers to be questioned. More security guards were converging on the store, and Sarah could see mall patrons being discreetly moved away from the area. "I need you both to place your hands on the counter and spread your feet," Morrison commanded, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who believed he was apprehending dangerous criminals. "Absolutely not," Sarah replied. "We've committed no crime, and we're not submitting to an illegal search. Ma'am, you're suspected of federal crimes. This is now a law enforcement matter." Sarah's mind raced through the legal implications. Morrison was acting on information received from what he believed was a legitimate law enforcement source. Even if the information was fabricated, his actions might be legally defensible. More concerning was the sophistication of the setup. Whoever was behind this understood both federal protocols and mall security procedures. David stepped closer to Sarah, not in a threatening way, but in the protective stance that had been drilled into him during years of guarding high-value targets. "Sarah," he said quietly, "we need to control this situation before it gets worse." She knew what he meant. They were federal agents, but they were also Black Americans in a situation that was rapidly escalating beyond reason. Every additional second increased the risk of violence, whether from overzealous security guards or responding police officers who might shoot first and ask questions later. "Morrison," Sarah said, using his name to personalize the interaction, "call your supervisor now. Tell him you have two federal agents who need immediate verification of their credentials. This is not a situation you want to handle incorrectly." For a moment, Morrison hesitated. Sarah could see him weighing his options, the career-ending consequences of assaulting federal agents against the equally serious implications of letting suspected criminals escape. His radio crackled again. "Morrison, do you have the subjects in custody?" "Negative, dispatch. They're claiming federal credentials. Negative on federal status. Intelligence indicates stolen badges. Proceed with detention." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. Whoever was feeding information to mall security had anticipated their credential display and prepared a counter-narrative. This wasn't random harassment or even simple frame-up. This was a sophisticated operation designed to neutralize federal agents using the very system they served. "David," she said quietly, "we need to call this in." "Already on it," he replied, his phone already in his hand. But as he started to dial, Morrison lunged forward and knocked the phone from his grip. "No communications," Morrison barked. "You're suspected of stealing federal equipment. That could be evidence." The phone skittered across the floor, coming to rest near Madison's feet. She looked down at it as if it might explode, clearly overwhelmed by a situation that had moved far beyond retail jewelry sales. 6 security guards now surrounded the jewelry store, creating a perimeter that effectively trapped Sarah and David inside. Mall shoppers were being redirected away from the area, though Sarah could see curious faces peering around corners and pillars. Someone was undoubtedly recording this on their phone, which could be either helpful or disastrous, depending on how the situation resolved. "Last chance," Morrison said, his hand now resting on what appeared to be a taser. "Hands on the counter, spread your feet, submit to search." Sarah looked at David, and in that moment, they made a decision that would define everything that followed. They weren't going to submit to illegal detention based on fabricated charges. They weren't going to allow themselves to be framed for crimes they didn't commit. And they weren't going to let racial prejudice and bureaucratic cowardice override their rights as American citizens and federal agents. "No," Sarah said simply. That's when the first sirens became audible in the distance, and Sarah realized that whoever was orchestrating this had just escalated to the next level. The sirens grew louder, multiplying from 1 to several as emergency vehicles converged on the Westfield premium outlets. Sarah counted at least 3 different tones: police, fire, and what sounded like federal response vehicles. Someone had called in a major incident. "David," she said quietly, "this is bigger than we thought." Before he could respond, Morrison's radio erupted with chatter. "All units, federal backup en route. Prepare for multi-agency response. Subjects are to be contained but not engaged until federal arrival." Federal backup. Sarah's blood ran cold as the implications hit her. If this was a legitimate federal operation, then either she and David had been placed under investigation without their knowledge, or someone with access to federal communications was using those channels to orchestrate their frame-up. The first police cruiser arrived with lights flashing, pulling up directly in front of the jewelry store. 2 officers emerged, and Sarah could see them conferring with the outer perimeter of security guards. The conversation was brief but intense, with multiple people pointing toward the store. "Ma'am, sir," Morrison said, his voice now carrying a note of vindication. "Federal agents are en route to take you into custody. I strongly recommend you cooperate." Madison, the sales associate, had retreated to the farthest corner of the store, clutching the diamond earrings that had started this entire nightmare. She looked terrified, and Sarah couldn't blame her. What had begun as a routine jewelry sale had become what appeared to be a federal law enforcement operation. A second police car arrived, followed by an unmarked black SUV with government plates. Sarah recognized the vehicle type immediately, the kind used by federal task forces for high-priority operations. Either her worst fears were being realized, or someone had managed to hijack legitimate federal resources for their operation. "Sarah," David said quietly, "look at the license plate on the SUV." She followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. The plate number was one she recognized from her own case files, a vehicle assigned to the joint ATF-FBI task force investigating weapons trafficking in the Mid-Atlantic region. The same task force that had been closing in on Anthony Kellerman's operation. The pieces began falling into place with terrible clarity. Kellerman hadn't just recognized her by accident. He'd identified her as the lead ATF agent on his case and had used his connections that apparently extended into federal law enforcement itself, to neutralize the investigation by neutralizing the investigators. The SUV doors opened, and 2 men in federal windbreakers emerged. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the familiar sight of tactical gear. The SUV doors opened, and 2 men in federal windbreakers emerged. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the familiar sight of tactical gear and earpieces that marked them as legitimate federal agents. But the question that terrified her was simple. Were they here to rescue federal agents under attack, or to arrest federal agents under investigation? David moved closer to the store window, studying the approaching agents with the trained eye of someone who'd worked protective details for years. "I recognize the tall one," he said quietly. "Agent Marcus Webb, FBI. He's solid." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. If legitimate agents were responding, then perhaps the frame-up was falling apart. But her relief was short-lived as she watched Webb's partner, a shorter, stockier man she didn't recognize, pull out what appeared to be arrest warrants. Morrison's radio crackled again. "All security personnel, federal agents are taking over the scene. Maintain perimeter. but do not interfere with federal operations. The chess pieces were moving exactly as someone had planned. Local security had been used to contain them, and now federal agents were arriving to legitimize whatever narrative had been constructed. Sarah realized with cold certainty that they were facing a level of corruption that extended far beyond Anthony Kellerman's weapons trafficking operation. Agent Webb approached the jewelry store entrance, his partner flanking him in standard tactical formation. Behind them, the police officers had taken positions that effectively blocked every exit route from the shopping corridor. "Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, Agent David Coleman," Webb called out as he entered the store. "I'm Agent Webb, FBI. I need you both to step away from each other and place your hands where I can see them." "Marcus," David said, using Webb's first name to establish their professional relationship. "What the hell is going on? We're shopping on our day off, and suddenly we're being treated like fugitives." Webb's expression was grim but not hostile. "David, I wish I could explain, but I've got orders from very high up. You're both wanted for questioning in connection with missing evidence from an ongoing federal investigation." "What evidence?" Sarah demanded. "What investigation? I've been working the Kellerman weapons trafficking case for 6 months. My evidence logs are perfect." Something flickered in Webb's eyes at the mention of Kellerman's name. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. The missing evidence is from the Kellerman case, specifically surveillance footage and financial records that were checked out under your authorization 3 days ago." Sarah's mind reeled. 3 days ago, she'd been in Richmond interviewing a confidential informant. She hadn't checked out any evidence, hadn't even been in the federal building where the evidence was stored. But if someone had used her credentials to access the evidence room, "That's impossible," she said. "Check the security logs. Check the fingerprints. Check anything. I wasn't in Richmond 3 days ago." "The logs show your badge scan at 11:47 p.m., Webb's partner said, speaking for the first time. His name tag read Agent Torres. "Security footage shows someone matching your description removing evidence boxes." David stepped forward. "Security footage can be manipulated. Badge scans can be spoofed. You know this, Marcus. Someone is setting us up." Webb nodded slowly. "I know. And under normal circumstances, I'd be inclined to believe you. But the orders came down from the Deputy Director's office. This is not a local field office decision. The Deputy Director." Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. If corruption extended that high in the federal hierarchy, then they weren't just facing a rogue agent or compromised task force. They were looking at institutional compromise at the highest levels. Madison, who had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, finally found her voice. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I don't understand any of this, but these people were just trying to buy earrings. They were nice. They had cash. They didn't do anything wrong." Agent Torres glanced at her dismissively. "Ma'am, this is a federal matter. Please step outside the store." "Actually," Sarah said, looking directly at Madison, "please stay. You're a witness to what really happened here, and I have a feeling we're going to need honest witnesses." Webb pulled out a set of handcuffs, his reluctance evident in every movement. "Sarah, David, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your backs. You're under arrest pending investigation. Perfect timing for emotional peak. If you believe that federal agents deserve the same constitutional protections as every other American citizen, type justice below." "Wait," David said, holding up one hand while keeping the other visible. "Marcus, before you do something that could end both our careers and compromise a major federal investigation, I need you to make one phone call." "David, I can't." "One call to the Secret Service duty desk. Ask them to verify my location and assignment status for the past week. Ask them specifically about any evidence I might have checked out from other agencies." Webb hesitated. Standard procedure called for immediate arrest and processing, but David's request was reasonable. Cross-agency verification was routine in complex investigations. "And while he's doing that," Sarah added, "call the ATF Richmond field office, ask Special Agent in Charge Patricia Williams where I was 3 days ago. Ask her specifically about the Kellerman surveillance operation and who has access to that evidence." Torres moved to object, but Webb held up a hand. "2 phone calls," he said. 5 minutes. "But if these calls don't verify your stories—" "They will," Sarah said with confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Because we're telling the truth." As Webb stepped away to make the calls, Sarah caught David's eye. They both knew that the next 5 minutes would determine whether they walked out of this mall as free agents or as suspected criminals. More importantly, they would determine whether the Kellerman investigation and potentially dozens of related cases would survive the corruption that was trying to destroy it. But as Webb began dialing his first number, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Agent Torres was already typing a text message on his phone, and she could see enough of the screen to read the words, "Package delivered." Initiating Phase 2. Sarah's heart hammered as she watched Torres finish his text message and slip his phone back into his pocket. Whatever Phase 2 meant, it was already in motion. She caught David's eye and tilted her head slightly toward Torres, hoping he'd pick up on her concern. Agent Webb had stepped outside the jewelry store to make his calls, speaking in low tones that couldn't be heard over the ambient mall noise. Through the window, Sarah could see him pacing as he waited for someone to answer, his body language suggesting growing confusion rather than confirmation. "Agent Torres," David said carefully, "how long have you been working with Marcus?" Torres looked up from adjusting his earpiece. 6 months. Why? Just wondering about the chain of command on this operation. Seems like it escalated pretty quickly from routine security check to federal arrest. It was a fishing expedition, but Torres's reaction was telling. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his eyes flicked toward the store entrance where Webb was still on the phone. "Sometimes situations develop faster than anticipated," Torres said. "The important thing is that we follow proper protocols." Sarah nearly laughed at the irony. Proper protocols would have involved verification of the arrest warrants, coordination with the agents' home offices, and a clear chain of evidence for the alleged crimes. Instead, they'd been ambushed in a shopping mall based on anonymous tips and fabricated evidence logs. Morrison, the security guard who'd started this nightmare, had retreated to a respectful distance but remained within earshot. Sarah noticed he was taking notes in a small notebook, either following his own protocols or documenting the incident for someone else's benefit. Webb's first phone call ended, and she could see him immediately dialing a second number. His expression had shifted from professional certainty to concerned confusion. Whatever he'd learned from the Secret Service wasn't matching the narrative he'd been given. Madison, the sales associate, had remained in the store despite Torres's suggestion that she leave. She was clutching the diamond earrings like a talisman, her eyes wide as she tried to process the surreal situation unfolding around her jewelry counter. "Ma'am," Torres said to Madison, his voice carrying an edge of impatience, "I really need you to step outside. This is a federal investigation." "Actually," Sarah said, "under federal witness protection statutes, Madison has the right to remain present during any proceedings where her testimony might be relevant." It was a stretch of the law, but Torres didn't challenge it. Sarah suspected he wasn't as familiar with federal procedures as his badge suggested, which raised troubling questions about his credentials and assignment to this operation. Webb ended his second call and returned to the store, his face grim. "We have a problem," he announced. Torres straightened. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where nothing adds up," Webb replied, looking directly at Sarah and David. "The Secret Service duty desk confirms that Agent Coleman has been on protective detail for the past week, including 3 days ago when he was supposedly in Richmond stealing evidence. His location is verified by multiple witnesses and electronic logs." Sarah felt a surge of relief, but she kept her expression neutral. One verification down, one to go. "And the ATF?" David asked. Webb's confusion deepened. "That's where it gets interesting. Special Agent in Charge Williams confirms that Agent Mitchell was conducting surveillance operations in Baltimore 3 days ago, not Richmond. But here's the strange part. She also confirms that evidence was checked out under Mitchell's authorization." "Impossible," Sarah said immediately. "My credentials would show if they'd been used." "Unless someone cloned your access codes," Webb said slowly, "or had inside help from someone with administrative privileges." Torres shifted uncomfortably. "Marcus, maybe we should transport them to the field office for proper interrogation. This mall isn't the place for—" "No," Webb cut him off sharply. "This mall is exactly where we need to be because this is where the setup happened." He turned to Sarah. "You said you were shopping on your day off. What brought you to this specific store?" Sarah gestured toward the diamond earrings still clutched in Madison's hands. "I wanted to buy those for my birthday next month, and my sister's wedding. We've been planning this shopping trip for weeks." "Weeks?" Webb's eyebrows rose. So your presence here was predictable. The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. If their shopping trip had been planned and discussed, then someone with access to their personal communications could have known they'd be here. Someone who could then orchestrate a frame-up timed to their presence at the mall. "David," she said quietly, "remember last Tuesday we talked about this shopping trip during dinner?" David's face went pale. "At the restaurant, the one with outdoor seating." They'd chosen the restaurant specifically because it felt safe to discuss personal matters away from their respective offices. But outdoor seating also meant their conversation could have been monitored by anyone with proper equipment and positioning. Webb was watching this exchange with growing alarm. "Are you suggesting someone had you under surveillance?" "I'm suggesting," Sarah said carefully, "that someone knew we'd be here, knew we'd be carrying cash, and knew enough about our work to fabricate evidence that would neutralize us at exactly the right moment." Torres's phone buzzed with an incoming text. He glanced at it, and Sarah caught a flash of panic across his features before he composed himself. "Marcus," Torres said urgently, "we need to wrap this up. I just got word that there's been a development in the Richmond investigation. They need these two in custody immediately." But Webb was no longer listening to his partner. His attention was focused entirely on Sarah and David, and the pieces of a much larger puzzle that were falling into place around them. "Torres," Webb said slowly, "what's your background? How did you get assigned to this operation?" "What do you mean?" Torres asked, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "I mean," Webb said, pulling out his own phone, "I don't remember requesting a partner for this assignment, and I've never seen you in the DC field office." As Webb started dialing what was clearly an emergency number, Torres reached inside his jacket, not for handcuffs or identification, but for something that made Sarah's blood turn to ice. The moment Torres's hand moved toward his jacket, David's Secret Service training took over. Without conscious thought, he stepped sideways, placing himself between the potential threat and Sarah, while simultaneously moving to shield Madison behind the jewelry counter. "Whoa, easy," Torres said, but his movement toward his jacket continued. "Just getting my phone." "Hands where I can see them," Webb commanded, his own weapon now drawn and trained on his supposed partner. "Agent Torres, if that's your real name, you're going to very slowly remove your hand from your jacket and place both hands on the counter." The jewelry store erupted into controlled chaos. Morrison and the other security guards, seeing federal agents drawing weapons, began shouting conflicting orders. Mall shoppers in the corridor started running. And somewhere in the distance, more sirens wailed as additional emergency vehicles responded to what was becoming a major incident. Torres's facade cracked completely. The nervous, slightly incompetent federal agent disappeared, replaced by someone with the cold calculation of a professional operative. "This is not how this was supposed to go," he said, his hands still moving toward his jacket. "Stop!" Webb shouted. "Federal agent, show me your hands!" But Torres was already committed to his course of action. His hand emerged from his jacket holding not a phone, but a small device that Sarah recognized immediately from her ATF training, a remote detonator. "Everyone stays calm," Torres said, his voice now carrying a distinct accent that hadn't been present earlier. "Nobody needs to get hurt if you all follow instructions." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Torres had a detonator, then there were explosives somewhere in the mall. The frame-up wasn't just designed to neutralize her and David. It was cover for something much larger and more devastating. "David," she said quietly, "evacuation protocols." He nodded almost imperceptibly. Secret Service training included explosive threat response, and the first priority was always getting civilians to safety. But with Torres holding a detonator and exit routes potentially compromised, their options were severely limited. Webb kept his weapon trained on Torres while speaking rapidly into his radio. "This is Agent Webb, FBI. I need immediate mall evacuation and bomb squad response to Westfield Premium Outlets. Suspect in custody has explosive device." "I wouldn't do that," Torres said calmly. "The devices are positioned at key structural points. Any attempt to evacuate will trigger automatic detonation." Madison whimpered behind the counter. Morrison and his security team looked completely out of their depth, their mall security training nowhere near adequate for handling terrorist threats. Sarah studied Torres's face, looking for tells that might indicate bluffing versus genuine capability. What she saw there chilled her. The calm competence of someone who'd done this before, who'd planned for multiple contingencies, and who was prepared to follow through on his threats. "What do you want?" Webb asked. "Simple," Torres replied. "Agents Mitchell and Coleman walk out of this mall with me. Nobody follows. The devices remain dormant. Everyone goes home safe." "And if we refuse?" David asked. Torres's smile was cold. "Then this mall becomes a memorial to the dangers of federal overreach. 300 casualties minimum. Your choice." Sarah felt the weight of impossible decisions crushing down on her. If she and David went with Torres, they would likely be killed once they were away from witnesses. But if they refused, hundreds of innocent people would die in an explosion designed to look like domestic terrorism. "There's a third option," she said quietly. Torres raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. You tell us who you're working for, why they wanted us neutralized, and how deep this corruption goes. In exchange, we help you walk out of here alive." "Sarah," Webb warned, "you can't negotiate with terrorists." But Sarah wasn't negotiating. She was buying time while her mind worked through the tactical situation. Torres had made several mistakes that suggested he wasn't as professional as he wanted them to believe. The detonator was real, but his positioning in the store was poor. He'd backed himself into a corner with limited exit routes. And most importantly, he was talking instead of acting, which suggested he needed them alive for reasons beyond simple elimination. "I'm not working for anyone," Torres said. "I'm working against someone. Against a system that allows federal agents to profit from the crimes they're supposed to prevent." The accusation hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Torres was suggesting that Sarah and David were corrupt agents who'd been stealing evidence to sell to criminal organizations. It was a narrative that would justify extreme measures and provide cover for whatever larger operation was taking place. "That's a lie," David said flatly, "and you know it." "Do I?" Torres asked. "Then explain how evidence keeps disappearing from cases you're involved in. Explain how weapons trafficking networks always seem to be one step ahead of federal investigations. Explain how criminal organizations have better intelligence than the agencies hunting them." Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The corruption wasn't with her and David. It was around them. Someone had been using their investigations to feed information to criminal networks, and now that they were getting too close to the truth, that someone was eliminating them. "Anthony Kellerman," she said suddenly. "This is about Kellerman." Torres's expression flickered, just for a moment, but enough to confirm her suspicion. "He's not just trafficking weapons," Sarah continued. "He's trafficking information, federal intelligence, investigation details, evidence, and someone in the system has been helping him do it." Torres's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced at it and his face went white. "Change of plans," he said, raising the detonator. "We're all out of time. Because Agent Sarah Mitchell just figured out who's really running this operation, and that means everybody in this mall is now a liability that needs to be eliminated." Sarah's mind raced as Torres's words sank in. Someone highly placed in federal law enforcement had been feeding intelligence to criminal networks. And now that she'd identified the pattern, everyone who'd witnessed this confrontation was marked for elimination. "Who is it?" she demanded. "Who's been selling federal intelligence?" Torres laughed bitterly. "You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about one corrupt agent. This is about an entire system that's been compromised from the top down." Webb kept his weapon trained on Torres while processing this revelation. "Names," he said. "Give us names." "Why?" "So you can report back to the same people who ordered your partner here to eliminate 2 federal agents?" Torres shook his head. "Agent Webb, you're a good man, but you're working for people who would sacrifice you without hesitation if it served their interests." David moved slightly closer to Madison, who was still crouched behind the jewelry counter. His Secret Service training had taught him to protect civilians first, but he also knew that any sudden movement might trigger Torres into detonating whatever explosives he'd planted. "The Kellerman investigation," Sarah said, pieces falling into place. "Someone's been feeding him information about federal operations. That's how his network stayed ahead of us for so long." "Not just Kellerman," Torres replied. "Dozens of operations, hundreds of criminals who should be in federal prison, but walk free because they know exactly when and how law enforcement will move against them. Morrison, the security guard who'd started this nightmare, had gone pale as he realized the magnitude of what was unfolding around him. "I just thought, they told me these two were shoplifters. This wasn't supposed to be—" "You weren't supposed to think," Torres cut him off. "You were supposed to follow orders and ask no questions, just like Agent Webb here. Just like everyone in the system who enables corruption by refusing to see it." Sarah's phone, which had been knocked to the floor earlier, suddenly buzzed with an incoming call. The sound was jarring in the tense silence, and everyone's attention momentarily shifted to the device lying near Madison's feet. "Don't answer it," Torres warned, but Sarah was already moving. "That's my direct supervisor," she said, recognizing the number on the screen. "Special Agent in Charge Patricia Williams. She's probably wondering why two of her agents are supposedly involved in a federal incident." Torres's grip tightened on the detonator. "Nobody talks to anybody. This situation is contained until I say otherwise." But Webb was already reaching for the phone. "Actually, I think we need to take this call. Patricia Williams has a reputation for integrity that goes back 20 years. If there's corruption in the federal system, she's someone we can trust." "You think," Torres said, "but how can you be certain? How can any of you be certain when the corruption goes as high as the deputy director's office?" The accusation hit like a bombshell. The deputy director of the FBI was a position of ultimate trust, someone with access to every major investigation, every classified operation, every piece of sensitive intelligence that federal law enforcement possessed. Sarah's phone continued buzzing insistently. "I'm answering it," she said, moving toward the device despite Torres's weapon. "Sarah, don't," David warned, but she was already reaching for the phone. Torres raised the detonator. One more step, and this entire mall becomes a crater. That's when Agent Webb made a decision that changed everything. Instead of trying to stop Sarah or negotiate with Torres, he did something completely unexpected. He holstered his weapon and stepped between Torres and the detonator's target. "Agent Torres, or whoever you really are," Webb said calmly, "I've been a federal agent for 15 years. I've seen corruption, incompetence, and politics interfere with justice more times than I care to count. But I've also seen good people do extraordinary things when they're given the chance to do what's right." Torres's hand wavered slightly. "This isn't about good people. This is about a system that protects criminals and destroys anyone who tries to expose the truth." "Then help us expose it," Webb said. "Help us fix it. But don't murder 300 innocent people because you're angry at a system that failed you." Sarah managed to reach her phone and answered the call. "Special Agent Mitchell." Patricia Williams's voice was sharp with concern. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? I'm getting reports that you and Agent Coleman are involved in some kind of federal incident at a shopping mall." "Ma'am, we're in a situation," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite the detonator pointed in her direction. "We were set up, framed for evidence theft in connection with the Kellerman investigation, and we have reason to believe the corruption extends much higher than we thought." "How high?" Williams asked immediately. Sarah looked directly at Torres. "Deputy Director level, according to our source." The silence on the phone was deafening. When Williams spoke again, her voice had changed completely. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully. Do not trust anyone claiming federal authority until I can verify their credentials personally. Do not allow yourselves to be transported anywhere, and do not discuss the Kellerman investigation with anyone." "Ma'am, there's more. We have someone here claiming to have explosives in the mall. He says he's trying to expose the corruption, but—" "Explosives?" Williams's voice cracked like a whip. "Sarah, you need to get everyone out of there immediately. I'm coordinating with bomb squad and federal response teams, but you need to buy time." Torres was watching this conversation with growing agitation. "Enough," he said, raising the detonator higher. "End the call now." But Sarah wasn't finished. "Ma'am, the person with the explosives claims to have evidence of systematic corruption in federal law enforcement. He says—" Torres lunged forward and knocked the phone from her hand, sending it clattering across the floor. "I said enough. There's stories like this happen in communities around the world, where good people stand up against corruption and injustice. Let us know what country and city you're watching from, so we can see how far these powerful messages of truth and accountability are reaching." But as Torres raised the detonator to trigger the explosives, Madison did something that no one expected. She stood up from behind the jewelry counter and said in a clear, strong voice, "Wait, I know who you are." Every eye in the jewelry store turned to Madison, the young sales associate who had been silent witness to the entire unfolding crisis. She stood behind the counter with surprising steadiness, the diamond earrings still clutched in one hand, but her fear had been replaced by something that looked like recognition. "You're Tommy Morrison," she said, looking directly at Torres. "You used to work here." Torres, or Morrison, went completely still. The detonator remained raised, but his attention was now focused entirely on the young woman who had just stripped away his carefully constructed identity. "That's impossible," Morrison, the security guard, said, confusion evident in his voice. "My name is Morrison. This guy is Torres." Madison shook her head. "No, you're Tim Morrison, security. But he's Tommy Morrison, and he used to manage the electronics store 2 levels up, about 8 months ago before it closed down." Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. Electronics store. Access to surveillance equipment. Knowledge of mall security protocols. Close enough to legitimate law enforcement to understand procedures, but bitter enough about something to turn against the system. "Tommy Morrison," Agent Webb said slowly, running the name through his mental database of federal personnel. "Former FBI technical analyst, dismissed for unauthorized access to classified databases. Dismissed for trying to expose corruption," Torres, Tommy Morrison, corrected sharply. "Dismissed for discovering that evidence was being systematically deleted from federal databases to protect criminal networks." David moved slightly closer to Madison, recognizing her courage but concerned for her safety. "What happened to the electronics store?" he asked. "It was part of a chain," Madison said, her voice growing stronger. "The company went bankrupt after some kind of federal investigation. Tommy lost his job, lost his house. He was really angry about it." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. A former federal analyst with grievances against the system, technical skills to manipulate security protocols, and intimate knowledge of how federal investigations operated. Someone perfectly positioned to either expose corruption or become part of it. "The Kellerman investigation," she said suddenly. "You've been feeding him information, not to help criminals but to build a case against the agents you thought were corrupt." Tommy's expression flickered between anger and something that might have been vindication. "I tracked every piece of evidence that disappeared from federal databases. I documented every investigation that was compromised. I built a case that would expose the entire network." "But you got it wrong," Webb said quietly. "Sarah and David aren't the corrupt agents. They're the ones getting too close to the real corruption." "How can you be sure?" Tommy demanded. "How can any of us be sure when the system is designed to protect itself?" That's when Sarah's phone, which had been lying on the floor, rang again. This time, Patricia Williams's voice came through the speaker, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sarah, if you can hear me, I've got updates. We've been monitoring communications, and we've identified the source of the false federal warrants. They originated from a terminal registered to Deputy Director Charles Hawthorne." The name hit the store like a physical blow. Deputy Director Hawthorne was a 30-year veteran of federal law enforcement, someone whose integrity had never been questioned, whose access to sensitive information was virtually unlimited. "That's impossible," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. Williams continued, "We've also discovered that Agent Torres's credentials are fake. The real Agent Torres is currently on assignment in Los Angeles and has been for the past month." Tommy's grip on the detonator tightened. "You see, even now when the corruption is exposed, they're covering it up, blaming a fake agent instead of admitting that their precious deputy director is selling federal intelligence." Sarah studied Tommy's face, looking for the truth behind his anger and paranoia. What she saw there was a man who'd been right about corruption existing, but wrong about where it was coming from. A man who'd let his justified anger turn into dangerous extremism. "Tommy," she said gently, "you were right about the corruption. Evidence was being stolen and sold. Investigations were being compromised. But you targeted the wrong people. How can you be certain?" He asked again, but with less conviction than before. "Because," David said, "if we were corrupt, why would we be shopping at a mall with our own money? Why would we react with surprise when security confronted us? Why would we call in our own supervisors to verify our credentials?" Tim Morrison, the security guard, had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. "Wait," he said. "If this guy isn't really a federal agent, then who gave the orders to detain them in the first place?" The question hung in the air like smoke, Everyone in the store had assumed that federal authority was directing the situation, but if Tommy's credentials were fake, then the entire operation had been orchestrated by someone else entirely. Sarah's phone crackled again with Patricia Williams' voice. "Sarah, we've traced the source of the mall security alerts. They didn't come from any federal agency. They came from a private security company with contracts throughout the Mid-Atlantic region." "What company?" Webb asked. "Kellerman Protective Services." The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Anthony Kellerman hadn't just been trafficking weapons and information. He'd been using his legitimate security business to orchestrate the elimination of federal agents who were getting too close to his operation. Tommy Morrison's face went white as the implications hit him. "I've been working for Kellerman," he said quietly. "He convinced me that I was exposing corruption, but I was just his weapon against the agents trying to stop him." Madison spoke into the stunned silence. "Tommy, you don't have to blow up the mall. You can still do the right thing." But before Tommy could respond, the lights in the jewelry store suddenly went out, and in the darkness Sarah heard the sound that every federal agent dreaded, the distinctive whine of a charging explosive device. Emergency lighting kicked in 3 seconds after the main power failed, casting everything in the jewelry store in an eerie red glow. The charging whine continued, growing higher in pitch with each passing moment. "Tommy, don't do this," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Kellerman played you. He used your anger and your skills to target the very people who could have helped you expose the real corruption." In the red-tinged darkness, Tommy Morrison looked like a broken man. The detonator trembled in his hand, and Sarah could see tears reflecting in the emergency lighting. 8 months, he said quietly. 8 months I've been building this case. 8 months I thought I was fighting for justice. David moved slowly toward the front of the store, where the emergency exit signs glowed in the darkness. His Secret Service training included emergency evacuation procedures, but with potential explosives in unknown locations, standard protocols were useless. Agent Webb was speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating with bomb squad personnel who were still en route. "We need immediate power restoration and tactical lighting," he said. "Suspect is armed with what appears to be a dead man switch." "It's not a dead man switch," Tommy said, overhearing the radio chatter. "It's on a timer. I set it when the lights went out. We have maybe 10 minutes before—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Everyone in the store understood that 10 minutes was nowhere near enough time to evacuate hundreds of people from a sprawling shopping complex. Madison was still behind the jewelry counter, but her earlier courage had given way to practical thinking. "Tommy," she said, "where are the explosives? If you tell us where they are, maybe Bomb Squad can disarm them." "Structural support columns," Tommy replied automatically. "Load-bearing supports in the main corridors, designed to bring down the entire mall." Sarah felt sick. Kellerman had convinced Tommy to position explosives that would kill hundreds of people and destroy a major commercial center, all to eliminate 2 federal agents who were getting too close to his operation. "Tommy, listen to me," she said urgently. "Kellerman doesn't care about exposing corruption. He doesn't care about justice. He only cares about protecting his criminal network. And right now, he's using you to commit mass murder." "I know," Tommy whispered. "I figured it out when the power went off. That wasn't part of my plan. Someone else is controlling this now." The implication was terrifying. If Kellerman or his associates had taken control of the explosive devices, then Tommy's detonator might not even be functional. They could all die simply because they'd become inconvenient witnesses to a larger conspiracy. Webb's radio crackled with an update. "All units, we have confirmation of explosive devices at multiple locations throughout the mall. Bomb Squad ETA is 8 minutes. Beginning immediate evacuation of surrounding areas." 8 minutes, David said quietly. "Timer plus response time, we're cutting it close." That's when Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Instead of focusing on escape or evacuation, she focused on the one thing that might actually save lives, getting Tommy Morrison to help them stop what he'd started. "Tommy," she said, moving closer despite the danger, "you were right about corruption in federal law enforcement. You were right that evidence was being stolen and investigations compromised. But you can still expose the real criminals." "How?" Tommy asked, and she could hear desperation in his voice. "Even if we survive this, Who's going to believe anything I say? I'm a terrorist holding a detonator in a shopping mall. You're a former federal analyst who discovered evidence of systematic corruption, Sarah corrected. You're a whistleblower who was manipulated by the very criminals you were trying to expose. And you're the only person with technical knowledge of how this entire operation was orchestrated. Madison spoke up from behind the counter. Tommy, you helped me when I first started working here. You taught me how to use the security system, how to track inventory, how to spot shoplifters. You were a good person. You still are. Webb lowered his weapon completely. Tommy, I'm going to make you. Webb lowered his weapon completely. Tommy, I'm going to make you a promise. If you help us stop this right now, if you help us save these people and expose the real corruption, I will personally ensure that your story gets told. Not as a terrorist, but as someone who tried to do the right thing and got manipulated by criminals. Tommy looked around the emergency-lit store at the faces of people who moments ago he'd been prepared to kill. Sarah could see the internal battle playing out across his features, the desire for redemption, warring against years of anger and betrayal. The timer, he said finally. I can stop the timer, but I need access to the mall's central security system. How far? David asked. Security office, 3rd level, west corridor, but Kellerman's people might be monitoring it. Sarah was already moving toward the store entrance. Then we go fast and we go together. Webb, can you coordinate with Bomb Squad to meet us there? Already on it, Webb replied, speaking rapidly into his radio. All units converge on Mall Security Office Level 3, Federal agents and technical specialists en route to disarm explosive devices. As they prepared to leave the jewelry store, Madison called out, "Wait." She emerged from behind the counter, still holding the diamond earrings that had started this entire nightmare. Walking directly to Sarah, she pressed them into her hands. "These belong to you," Madison said simply. "When this is over, when the truth comes out, I want you to remember that not everyone believed the lies about you." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes as she accepted the earrings. They felt heavier now, weighted with meaning far beyond their monetary value. They represented hope, dignity, and the refusal to let prejudice and corruption define her worth. "Thank you," she whispered. Tommy Morrison looked at this simple exchange, a white sales clerk defending the integrity of black federal agents, and something seemed to break inside him. Not break apart, but break free. "Let's go stop this," he said firmly. "Let's expose the real criminals." But as they rushed toward the security office, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the corridor, Anthony Kellerman himself, with a backup detonator and a plan to ensure that no one would leave the mall alive to testify against him. The emergency lighting in the mall corridors created a maze of red shadows and uncertain visibility, as Sarah, David, Tommy, and Agent Webb raced toward the security office. Their footsteps echoed in the unnaturally quiet space. Most shoppers had been evacuated when the power failed, leaving behind only security personnel and emergency responders. 2 minutes, Tommy said, checking his watch as they reached the 3rd level. Maybe less. The security office door was already open, its banks of monitors displaying feed from cameras throughout the mall. Most showed empty corridors and closed storefronts, but several screens revealed bomb squad personnel in protective gear, moving carefully through the main concourses. Tommy went straight to the central control terminal and began typing rapidly. "I need to access the detonation sequence," he muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "It's encrypted, but I know the base code." Sarah positioned herself near the door, watching for threats while David coordinated with Webb to ensure Bomb Squad knew their location. The walkie-talkie chatter was constant now. Tactical teams, evacuation coordinators, federal response units all trying to manage a situation that had spiraled far beyond anyone's control. "Got it," Tommy said suddenly. "Timer shows 90 seconds. I can stop it, but I need 30 seconds of uninterrupted access." That's when they heard the footsteps in the corridor outside. Sarah peered around the doorframe and felt her blood turn to ice. Anthony Kellerman was walking calmly toward the security office, flanked by 2 men in tactical gear who were definitely not law enforcement. He carried what appeared to be a military-grade detonator, and his expression was that of a man who'd already made peace with killing everyone in the building. "We have company," Sarah whispered urgently. "Kellerman, armed escort. 60 seconds out." David immediately moved to the other side of the doorway, creating a crossfire position. Agent Webb continued his radio coordination while drawing his weapon. Tommy kept typing, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked to crack his own encryption. 40 seconds on the timer, Tommy announced. 20 seconds to completion. Kellerman's voice echoed from the corridor. Agent Mitchell, Agent Coleman, I know you're in there. Time to end this charade. Sarah made a split-second decision. Instead of waiting for Kellerman to reach them, she stepped into the corridor with her hands visible, but her posture radiating federal authority. Anthony Kellerman, she called out, you're under arrest for weapons trafficking, conspiracy to commit terrorism, and the attempted murder of federal agents. Kellerman laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Agent Mitchell, you've caused me considerable trouble. But don't worry, in about 30 seconds, none of it will matter anymore. 20 seconds, Tommy called from the security office. The timer's been stopped, Sarah lied, hoping to buy crucial time. Your plan failed. Surrender now and maybe you'll live to see trial. But Kellerman wasn't buying it. He raised his own detonator, and Sarah could see that it was different from Tommy's device. Newer, more sophisticated, with what appeared to be satellite connectivity. Remote backup system, Kellerman said with satisfaction. Did you really think I'd trust something this important to a disgruntled ex-analyst with emotional problems? 15 seconds. Tommy's voice was strained with concentration. David emerged from the security office, moving with the smooth precision of his Secret Service training. Kellerman, you're surrounded. Federal agents, bomb squad, local law enforcement. Even if you trigger that device, you won't escape. I'm not planning to escape, Kellerman replied calmly. I'm planning to send a message. That no one, not federal agents, not whistleblowers, not self-righteous civilians, no one interferes with my operations and lives to regret it. 10 seconds, Tommy called. Agent Webb appeared in the doorway behind David, his radio still active. All units, suspect is armed with explosive device. Prepare for immediate breach and neutralization. Kellerman's finger moved toward the trigger button on his detonator. Sarah made the decision that every federal agent hopes they'll never have to make. She drew her service weapon and fired 3 precise shots center mass, dropping Kellerman before he could complete his motion. The detonator flew from his hands, skittering across the floor toward one of his escorts. David was already moving, tackling the man before he could reach the device. Time! Tommy shouted from the security office. Sequence terminated. All devices disarmed. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of tactical teams converging on their location and the distant wail of ambulance sirens. Anthony Kellerman lay motionless on the mall floor, his conspiracy to eliminate federal agents and commit mass murder ended by the very people he'd tried to destroy. Agent Webb secured the backup detonator while speaking rapidly into his radio. All units, devices are disarmed. Repeat, explosive threat is neutralized. Primary suspect is down. Sarah holstered her weapon and leaned against the corridor wall, suddenly exhausted by the adrenaline crash that followed life-and-death situations. David moved to her side, offering silent support in the way that only longtime partners could provide. Tommy Morrison emerged from the security office, looking like a man who'd just awakened from a nightmare. It's over, he said quietly. The timer, the devices, all of it. Everything's been disarmed. But Sarah knew it wasn't really over. There would be investigations, hearings, trials. There would be questions about how someone like Kellerman had gained access to federal intelligence and federal resources. There would be a reckoning with the corruption that had allowed this conspiracy to flourish. Most importantly, there would be justice. Sarah Mitchell stood before a congressional subcommittee, wearing the diamond earrings she'd tried to buy on what was supposed to be a simple shopping trip. The irony wasn't lost on her. Jewelry that had triggered a racial profiling incident had become a symbol of her refusal to be intimidated by corruption or prejudice. Agent Mitchell, the subcommittee chair said, can you summarize for the record what your investigation revealed about the extent of corruption in federal law enforcement? Senator, we discovered that Anthony Kellerman had cultivated relationships with 17 federal employees across 6 agencies over a period of 8 years. He used these relationships to obtain advance warning of law enforcement operations, steal evidence from ongoing investigations, and eliminate agents who posed threats to his criminal network. In the gallery behind her, Sarah could see David Coleman, who had testified earlier about the security failures that had allowed Kellerman's conspiracy to operate undetected. Also present was Madison Chen. She'd kept her sales job at the jewelry store and had become an unlikely advocate for retail workers' rights to refuse participation in discriminatory practices. Tommy Morrison sat in the witness section, waiting for his turn to testify about the technical methods Kellerman had used to manipulate federal databases. His cooperation with the investigation had earned him immunity from prosecution and a position as a federal whistleblower advocate. Agent Mitchell, another senator asked, "What reforms would you recommend to prevent similar conspiracies in the future?" Sarah thought about that question for a moment, remembering the terror and helplessness she'd felt when systems she'd trusted had been turned against her. "Senator, I'd recommend 3 key changes. First, mandatory cross-agency verification for any operation targeting federal personnel. Second, independent oversight of evidence handling with real-time audit trails. And third, protection for whistleblowers that goes beyond current statutes to include technical specialists and support personnel." The hearing continued for another hour, covering technical details and policy recommendations that would shape federal law enforcement for years to come. But Sarah's mind kept drifting back to that moment in the jewelry store when Madison had handed her the earrings and said they belonged to her. Because that's what this had all been about, really. Belonging. The right to shop in expensive stores without justifying your presence. The right to serve your country without having your loyalty questioned because of your race. The right to expect justice from the systems designed to protect it. After the hearing, Sarah and David walked out of the Capitol building into the warm Washington, D.C. sunshine. They'd been offered media interviews, book deals, speaking engagements, all the opportunities that came with being reluctant heroes in a story that had captured national attention. They'd turned them all down. "Ice cream?" David asked, pointing to a vendor cart near the Capitol steps. "Ice cream," Sarah agreed. As they walked toward the cart, David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. "Madison?" he said. "She sold another pair of diamond earrings today. Said she made sure to tell the customer the whole story about why those particular earrings were special." Sarah touched the earrings she wore, feeling their familiar weight against her neck. "Some stories are worth telling," she said. They bought ice cream and sat on a bench overlooking the National Mall. 2 federal agents who'd saved hundreds of lives and exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. But in that moment, they were just Sarah and David, enjoying ice cream in the sunshine, grateful to be alive and still fighting for justice. Because that's what justice looks like sometimes. Not dramatic courtroom victories or headline-grabbing arrests, but quiet moments when good people choose to do the right thing, even when the cost is high. And that's a story worth telling. Thank you to everyone who typed justice and to all who shared their locations from around the world. Your global support means everything. If these stories inspire you, please subscribe to join our community and help us share more incredible tales of courage and justice. Until next time, keep believing in the power of truth.